Welcome to the Business Interview. I'm Marcus Carlson. There have been many twists and turns in the Eurozone crisis. This week, Slovakia shifted into the spotlight. The Slovak parliament voted on whether to back a reformed version of the Eurozone's bailout fund. How many more chapters are there to this story? To discuss that, I'm joined by one of the world's most respected economists, Nobel Prize laureate Joseph Stiglitz. He's here in Paris for a conference at the OECD, and he joins us from across town from the headquarters of that organization. Welcome to France 24, and thanks for speaking to us.
Nice to be here.
Now, the global economy is going through a soft patch. How soft do you think this patch is, and when are we going to be able to get out of it? I suppose that's the $10 million question at this moment.
Well, first, one has to remember that we haven't really gotten over the downturn that began at the end of 2008. In many of the countries, GDP is not back to where it was before the crisis. So while you might call it a soft patch, I think I would call it a non-recovery.
And how long is this non-recovery going to go on for? That's the question that people are asking in the United States as well as here in Europe.
Well, part of the answer to that depends on what policies are pursued. If in the United States and in Europe they continue to follow the policy that's being talked about of austerity, then I think it's going to likely be a very long time. If they undertake more stimulative actions, government infrastructure programs, investments in technology, then I think we can get over it much more quickly. But the direction we're heading now is not one that gives me much hope.
Now, you say that governments need to spend themselves out of this soft patch or crisis to boost growth. The question is, though, in this age of austerity, where are we going to get that money from to spend on growth?
Well, there are 2 points. One is, if you borrow money for investments, the country's balance sheet is improved. In the United States and in many of the European countries, there's been underinvestment in the public sector. So right now, countries like France, the United States can borrow at relatively low interest rates, and the returns on their investments are much higher than the interest rate they have to pay. So a business would, if it could borrow at the rates the government could borrow and have returns of the magnitude they have, the growth will more than pay for the cost of the funds. Now, if you can't do that, and financial markets are making life extraordinarily difficult, they caused the crisis, and now they're making it very difficult to recover from it. If you can't, then there's still another alternative, which is what we call the balanced budget framework, where you raise taxes and you raise expenditures. In the United States, we have so much inequality that if we just raise taxes a little bit on the top 5%, 2%, 1%, we can generate a lot of income. And if we take that money and we spend it on investment, the economy will grow by a lot.
If we turn back to the Eurozone now, though, it seems as if European leaders are getting their acts together when it comes to dealing with this Eurozone crisis. There's talk of recapitalizing European banks, giving Greece more bailout money, and of letting banks take a bigger hit on their Greek debt holdings. Is that the right recipe from your perspective?
Yes, I think they're going in the right direction. There's one other aspect that was brought out in the agreement that was made among the leaders last July, where they recognized that if the countries that are having troubles like Greece and Portugal and Ireland, if they're going to get out of their difficulties, they have to grow. And they won't be able to grow within the austerity framework of living within their budget. So there has to be some source of outside money for investment, like the European Investment Bank or a solidarity fund for stabilization. There has to be some growth program. That has not yet been forthcoming. And unless there is that growth program, I think recovery is going to be very difficult.
How hopeful are you that we're actually going to see that kind of growth program, seeing the political atmosphere and the political climate in the US as well as here in Europe?
I'm not very optimistic, and that's why you asked me before, how long do I think this downturn is going to last? I'm not optimistic at all, because I think that the full range of policy measures that need to be taken are not likely to be taken. You know, monetary policy got us into the mess. Monetary policy is not going to get us out, and that means there's only one thing left, and that's fiscal policy. Economies that are as sick as the European and American economy don't recover on their own very quickly. Eventually, of course, things will get back. But as Keynes put it, in the long run, we're all dead.
Let's talk about fiscal policy then. There's a fledgling debate here in Europe on whether or not to create a common finance ministry for the Eurozone. Is that a good idea? Is more European integration really the answer?
Yes, I do. I do think so. I think more European integration is important. But it's important to realize that it has to go beyond just setting common frameworks. A lot of people have been saying, oh, if we had only enforced the Maastricht Convention, if we only forced countries to live within their means. The fact is that Spain and Ireland, before the crisis, had a surplus, not a deficit. Before the crisis, they had a very low debt-GDP ratio. So just maintaining the Growth and Stability Pact, just enforcing those common elements is not the solution. What there needs to be is a common fiscal framework with money to help those countries that are affected by a shock, such as that which has affected, say, Spain and several of the other European countries.
But just as when it comes to spending more money for growth, there are big political risks there as well when it comes to more European integration. There's not really that kind of appetite in the Eurozone for more integration from the political perspective, at least. What do you say about that?
Well, I think the Europeans are going to have to make up their mind which direction they're going to go. They're at a place that I think is not viable. If they decide they don't want to provide that framework, the likelihood that the euro falls apart is very great. So what is at stake here is really the survival of the euro. If people are committed to making a success out of the euro, then they have to be committed to more fiscal integration.
I want to switch tack a little bit. Eyebrows have been raised in the past few days, and since you came out to support people who are protesting in and around Wall Street in the United States against corporate greed, why are you supporting these protesters?
Well, it's interesting. Since I came out in support, a lot of other people have jumped in. President Obama has expressed his acknowledgement of the underlying grievances, the dissatisfaction. This is a very deep-seated concern across the American spectrum, and it's not just young people. I was at an opera where there was a line in the opera about bankers, and you could see the audience response was one where that it was reflecting a real concern they had. So the point is, something is wrong with our economic system. When we have an economy where we're throwing people out of their homes, where we have homeless people and empty homes, where we have a society where we have so many needs, and yet people can't find work and capital is being underutilized, machines are being underutilized. The degree of inequality in our society has grown to an unacceptable level, where the top 1% now gets more than 20% of all of the income. And so one of the things the group has been saying, we are the 99%, and if our economy is judged to be working, it has to be working for us. And that's actually one of the main themes of this conference here at the OECD, a recognition that GDP doesn't reflect really what's important. GDP per capita has been going up, but yet most Americans, let me repeat that, most Americans today are worse off than they were in 1997. The typical male worker working full-time, his income today is comparable to what it was in 1978. So our economic system isn't working, and that's what these people are saying.
But hasn't this crisis shown, though, that at the end of the day, yeah, sure, well-being is an important thing, but at the end of the day, it is GDP growth that matters, along with cutting down on budget deficits?
Actually, that's another point that's been emphasized within the conference. GDP before the crisis looked like it was pretty good, but the numbers were not real numbers because 40% of all investment was in real estate, and that was based on bubble prices. 40% of all corporate profits were in the financial sector. That was made up numbers that didn't reflect reality. The fact was the growth was not sustainable, and just looking at GDP didn't tell you that. So we have to have metrics that not only talk about how most citizens are doing, we have to have metrics that tell us whether the growth that we see is sustainable. And unfortunately, GDP doesn't tell us that, let alone telling us what is happening to the environment. So there's not only a question of economic sustainability, there's also a question of environmental sustainability. And that's a real question for our whole planet.
All right, Joseph Stiglitz, unfortunately, we're going to have to wrap it up there. Thanks very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us.
Thank you.
And with that, we're going to end the programme. Thanks for watching France 24.